At tea time this evening, we had a discussion, and one of the main topics that was brought up was around joy and beauty and the things that can be enjoyed in life, and the sense that perhaps what the teachings in our tradition or the Buddhist teaching is that one shouldn't experience joy or happiness or observe beauty because of its ephemeral nature, that there's something negative about it. And I thought it was a very good topic, because there can be a sense of, in terms of how one takes on the Buddhist teachings, a sense of very seriousness about the practice, dreariness. One shouldn't indulge in any kind of positive experiences, and that's not that's not what the Buddha was really teaching. In fact, after his many years of ascetic practices, he decided that it really wasn't getting him anywhere, torturing his body, starving himself, and really he did see that he was quite good at doing it, but it wasn't really getting him anywhere. It wasn't getting him to the spiritual understanding he was seeking. And so, in recognizing that, he actually questioned himself. He said, well, there is a joy that he did know that he experienced, both in his meditative attainments when he was practicing with what were the jhanas. And interestingly enough, though he was quite well versed and acquainted with these very deep states of peace and calm, he didn't remember the time that he didn't recall to his mind when he was explaining this to himself or his companions later that this was the time that he experienced the joy and happiness and of a mind that experienced such deep peace. It was when he was a child. He was 2 years old, I don't think he actually gave an age. Imagine maybe he was 3 or 4. He was sitting down by a tree while his father was plowing. It's said in some kind of a sort of plowing, where it was a celebration around some time when they were out plowing the fields, and it was a ceremonial thing, because there was a sense maybe his father wasn't actually in the fields too often, but he was out there and sitting under this tree, and all of a sudden he seems to have slipped into this state of jhana, this experience of mind that was quite subtle and deep and profound, but yet incredibly peaceful, and in that way very joyous. And he asked himself, why would I be afraid of that joy? Why have I gone so far away from that and sought essentially self-torture, trying to torture his body into submission and thinking that would allow him to gain in his spiritual quest. So many of us are aware of this story. And the question is often, well, how is it that we can see, like, that what came up in tea time was, well, what about my relatives, or if I want to just see a beautiful tree, or just feel the joy of what I experience when I see beauty, or when I think about the people in my life and I want to be around them. And I think it's quite a good question, because you can think, well, there's nothing really wrong with that. except when it comes to how our minds incline towards desire, and what it is that we want, what it is that we think we're trying to get. So I just suggested, well, you might feel very joyous, as I can feel too, around family members, friends. But how quickly does that often wear off? You spend 5 or 6 hours with someone. If I was to ask, well, was that all 6 hours just exuberant joy and ecstatic happiness? And usually it's not. And it's not because of our own minds. We fluctuate, we move towards experiences that are pleasant and unpleasant, and then we often have reactions to those experiences, whether we want more of them or we want to get away from them. And so it's not, of course, a sense that we can't experience the joy that arises when we think about other people in positive ways. We see something beautiful in one of the suttas when the Buddha was quite old. He recognized that as he looked over the Ganges Valley in India, where he often lived and stayed during his monastic life, he recognized this could be the last time that I see the Ganges Valley. And we have a sense that he really recognized the beauty of that. But also there's also a sense there wasn't attachment there. There wasn't a longing for that experience, or that it shouldn't be my last experience. It should go on forever and ever, and I should have this always. But it's that quality that the Buddha knows. It's just impermanent. It's just how it is. Something that is beautiful will fade, but there's still beauty. There's still goodness to be seen there. Likewise, he recognized when his chief disciples, Mahamoggallana and Sariputta, passed away, he recognized that those were lights in the world that went out, that were quite meaningful and powerful and very important in his own life, as they were to others. And yet we're struck by a sense that there wasn't necessarily a longing there. And in fact, the Buddha, since Ananda tended to be such a softy, he was quite upset when he learned that Sariputta died, and the Buddha, in a fairly humorous exchange, and I say it's humorous because Ananda was the one who was most acquainted with the Buddha's teachings. He had memorized them, and he was the one who essentially was the keeper of the teachings because of his great memory. And he said, Ananda, did I tell you that things were permanent? People weren't going to die? That this kind of thing was going to happen? And Ananda had to admit, no. Everything that he had learned wasn't that case. There is impermanence. There is a sense that old age, sickness, and death occur. And yet there can be a pervasive desire for this to not be the case. And if we look closely at our own minds, and as I'm just reflecting upon my own mind, it's a constant feeling throughout so many moments of the day of, this isn't impermanent, or I don't want this to be impermanent. I want this to keep lasting. Whether that's eating out of my bowl, or some kind of pleasant exchange I have with someone. There's a sense that it can just keep going on and on. And the reason that I say that, even though it might not be so obvious, that's that desire for some pleasantness to keep continuing, is that when it ends, there is just this, for myself, I recognize this kind of very infantile discontent that arises. So it shouldn't be this way. It should be some other way. I should get what I want. I was in the abbot's office with Ajahn today, and I found one of these buckets that we have. We have a lot of excess buckets right now in the monastery because we've changed out some containers in the kitchen, and so I found one in the kitchen. Asked if I could use it, and so I was cleaning it out in the abbot's office shower, and I said, "Oh, this is so great! Like I can actually take the handle off and wash this out." And so I was enjoying just the ease of and the convenience of washing this bucket out, the little joys you get as a monk, and then I kind of the shower has a curtain, and I moved the curtain away and put the bucket to the side, and I just saw there was water all over the floor, and I just, it immediately came up in my mind, this should not be happening. This is not okay. And Ajahn was in the room, and he's on retreat right now, so I decided to bother him. And I said, wouldn't it be just so much easier, I said from the bathroom, if we had like a plastic guard or something around the shower, so it didn't like just spill out. I know this is kind of how it's done in Thailand. You have these floors that are completely flat, and the water can just be swept easily. But wouldn't it be just so much easier? And he said, well, when I take a shower, the floor doesn't get that wet. And I thought, actually, I said, that's not true. Actually, it does. And then I started to notice, like, okay, there's some sort of pet peeve coming on right now. I'm expressing, but I couldn't let it go, and I just started, squeegeeing aggressively the water into the drain, and noticing that it wasn't making a huge difference, wasn't getting the floor dry, and that my feet were now going to be wet and dirty, and on the mind went into something that was pretty insignificant. But my mind really, I could see the discontent there, and the belief in the view that, no, everything would be okay in the world if there was a rail here that prevented the water from spilling out, and you're wrong, Ajahn. And it just made so much sense. That's just obvious. That's what needed to be done. And I thought of, in the terrace vestry, there's a guardrail around the shower that I admire and makes so much sense that someone put in. But maybe they shouldn't have used wood, and then that would have been better. Although it's treated wood, it looks nice, but someday it's going to rot. And on the mind goes like this. There's just this. There can be this constant sense of there's some better way. There's something else, something that can be more beautiful or more efficient, easier to deal with. And I think in both ways, when there's, we're searching for joy, or we find joy with others, or we're disappointed and happy about some situation that occurs, it's just that refrain around, like, well, what's actually occurring right now? Is there discontent in the mind when I'm experiencing joy or happiness? Am I aware that when that joy and happiness fades, there's going to be the search for more joy and happiness? Or there's going to be a pervasive sense of, like, well, it shouldn't fade. It should stay the same. I should keep finding more and more joy. Or the situation shouldn't be this way. I mean, don't people know how to design showers? Come on, this is the modern world, Who could have made a shower like this? And it's just it's quite humorous, because, as I said, the word infantile comes up. It's like the baby activity of the mind, but the sad part is how easy it is to fall for it, and to fall for the view that the way that I'm thinking is correct. If I only lived with these particular people, I'd be happier. If this one monk just didn't live with me, then I could realize Nibbana. And it really, the mind can really get stuck on that very easily, and miss the whole fact of the matter, that that's the lesson, that's our training, that's the learning that we're doing. Because we can keep adjusting every little nook and cranny of where we live and who we live with, and how something should be done in our life, and then just miss that sense. Oh, wait a minute, there's discontent here. There's some work to be done. I'm not seeing the bigger picture. Because of my sense that there's something wrong, and that something needs to be righted externally, not in my own mind, then I end up suffering. There's just stress. The mind feels, oh, this isn't okay. There's something wrong here. And so the work to be done is like, well, how can we be content? How can I realize contentment in this moment where there's a search for satisfaction in the external world, the satisfaction that's based on permanence, on things not changing. When we start to recognize this discontent, whether it's with not having enough joy, or needing to make everything sort of perfect in our life, sort everything out, or create the circumstances where we won't have to deal with difficulty anymore, then the irony is that when we do experience true contentment, then there is satisfaction with things just being pervasively wrong. And that's the radical aspect of the Buddha's teaching. When we completely let go, then those things that we believe that are impossible for us to live with, they're no longer a problem for us. So we hear this refrain, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become separated from me. This should be reflected upon again and again. And if you hear that, it's, oh, that's awful. That's a terrible thing. Why would you want to think about that? Or thinking about death or whatever it is. How morbid. But it's none of those things. It's just completely true. And so it's helpful to ask ourselves on the path, where is there a problem with something that's completely true? And the Buddha's teachings are that we can learn through our own contentment, through gratitude, through seeing clearly, learning, training, inclining our minds towards the wholesome, that some of the many things that would cause a lot of sadness in life, actually, it's not as though they're no longer sad. It's that we recognize their truth in life. As the Buddha said, there is dukkha, there's stress, there's suffering, there's unsatisfactoriness, there's discontent. And I think that's why so many people are attracted to Buddhism, so many people are attracted to the Buddha's teachings, why most of us, I think, are here, is because, oh, there's a way out of this, something that seems actually impossible. That the recognition of the fact that life, no matter when or who we are, or what life we live, there's just always going to be a sense that it's not quite right. And then when we accept that, not out of defeat, or that everything is just not worthwhile living, it's just, oh, okay, we don't have to suffer around it. We don't have to make a problem out of it. And for many of us, that's obviously what the Buddha is teaching, but I find it incredible how something so basic is amazingly difficult to actually see through and understand. That it is the desire for things to be otherwise that's causing our stress. And if we figured out how to undermine that desire, then we can be released from that difficulty, that sense that things should be different, things should be better than how they are. I should be able to get what I want. So when we incline our minds towards learning and training, then we have that potential to see much more clearly how kind of the ruts and the problems we get ourselves into, our own personal habits, the anusaya, the underlying tendencies that we have. And we can get ourselves into a lot of traps that cause us not to see things clearly. And for each of us, that's quite different. I think for myself, right now, I'm in a fairly new role in the monastery. I tended to usually be a monastery secretary or guest monk, dealing with various administrative roles. And now I'm in a role called the work monk. And just dealing with what work tasks need to get done in the monastery and trying to balance out who can do them and what can be done and when does it need to be done, and various intricacies about that changing quite often. And I can see in my own mind how, depending on how I'm looking at the experience of being in this role, I can choose to suffer a lot or a little. So for example, if there's a task assigned and somebody does the task and then I see what's done, the mind can immediately go towards that. Oh, that's not right, or oh, it should have been better this way, and some of the things that come out of that are quite interesting. It's like, oh, why didn't this particular person figure that out? Or why was it done in this particular way? I thought I asked for it to be done in this other way. And it's interesting because it's not, like, there are some things in a monastery that are very important. So like if you're maintaining some of the batteries in our solar system, for example, and you have been trained to do it the correct way, and then you lose mindfulness for a moment, you forget something, and then the battery system is destroyed. That could cost a lot of money to replace something like that. So I don't want to say that all our tasks are meaningless. They're not. But the important aspect that I've been reflecting on as the work monk is that it's not so important that a task is done, perfectly well or efficiently. It's more around learning. It's more around, like, it's really a training in our own minds. So for me, if I see somebody's done some particular work or I hear something, I first can really see that discontent over the if I find, oh, it wasn't done as well as I wanted, or in a different way, or something broke, or whatever it is. And hopefully what arises and what I've been trying to work on is, oh, wait a minute, that's not so important right now. I mean, first is to deal with that aversion that comes up, that habit of mind for myself, just to recognize that and see, oh, this is dukkha right now. But also to see, okay, there's a lot going on here that's much more important than just a job. there's gratitude there. There's appreciation for someone putting their effort into something that they were asked to do, their willingness to do it, their willingness to perhaps drop what it is that they wanted to do and do what's being requested for the monastery, for the well-being of the community, and gratitude for their willingness to do that, and I'm not going to do that. There's the fact that people are learning, and there's no expectation that we have to get it all right. In fact, it might be that if we're always getting it right, and there's no mistakes, then it's possible there's not really a challenge that's occurring. Because that's when we learn most, is through our mistakes. We learn most. I thought I knew how to do this, I didn't know how to do it, and so what comes up for me around that very notion is, I don't think I explained that well enough. I didn't get clarity around that. And so for me, it becomes a learning experience about my own sense of communication and how that can be worked with and improved, and especially around, in regards to that, the sort of self and the egocentric point where it's just like, well, in my own mind I explain that perfectly, but it doesn't work that way. It's in the other person's mind if you explained it perfectly. Did they understand? And so it's all of these things come up a lot, and why I'm bringing them up is that they allow for me in this particular case to say, okay, I'm holding what it is that I'm perceiving and understanding in a different way that's causing me dukkha, if I'm moving towards unwholesome paths of understanding it. I remember when I was a junior monk, and I wasn't in these administrative roles, because usually when you're in those roles, you tend to know what you're doing every day. And so when I was in my more junior days, I was assigned work, and I would tend to dread just what was it, the fact that I wouldn't know what was about to happen. I'm about to be assigned something and I don't know, and oftentimes for myself as a work monk, I will go around and talk to people, not always, about what they're going to do. But that's not always the case. And it's interesting, the perspective now, because when I was a junior monk, it was almost like the work monk was torturing me. I don't want to do that. Like intentionally torturing, like, I have to be told to do this thing that I really don't want to do. And then when you switch the roles, it's funny. It's like there really isn't that sense that I have of wanting to torture anyone, and or create situations that are difficult, or but the jobs in the monastery, they're not always pleasant. I came down sometimes just to see how is somebody doing something, and so Tanjoti Manto was cleaning out the grease trap, and I'm just watching what he's doing, how he's doing it, to see how that works. And I hadn't seen that before when I went down to see him, and I didn't realize how bad it smelled when you're cleaning it. And you get into rubber gloves, and you're pretty careful, but there's water being sprayed all over, and there's also that recognition, though. There's a bit of when you do ask people to do tasks, it's one has to have sensitivity, because it's not always, these jobs aren't always fun, and so trying to remember that dread I felt. But also that came from a sort of not just a need to know what one was doing, but but also kind of a sense like, well, some of the tasks were quite unpleasant. And so there, that just recognizing in my own mind, like, oh, okay, we create stories, I think, and I know, just speaking from my own experience, about how something is going to be or what it's like, and we can just not see very clearly, like, that's my own perception about how something is. That's my own story. But when we get down to it, we get to see, oh, okay, this is really quite different than how I'm holding it. And so that's another way, I think, that we can kind of quell the disappointment or the expectations we have. This just, it just happened recently with Tan Jyotimanto again. I asked him to check the septic tanks. I'm really not trying to torture you, Tan Jyotimanto. And so he checked the septic tanks, and he said, and so I just assigned him to do it. And he said, halfway through it, he said, it's useful to usually have a second person. And what came up in my mind was, I never had a second person when I used to do the septic tanks. And then I said, well, just try and do it on your own, and then get back to me and see how it works. And later that day, when he had gotten through a bit of the work, he said, yeah, it still would be helpful to have a second person. And then he explained to me what he meant by that, why it would be useful, some of the things that I wasn't seeing clearly around the task, or that I misremembered from when I used to do it, or possibly misremembered the difficulty I had doing it on my own. And so that all of these ways of investigating, allowing myself to try to see from another person's perspective, or to see really how I'm holding, just how I view reality, has helped me enormously. Because what normally would come up is just a justification, like, well, just, you can do it on your own, come on, just try it out. And then there was a sense, oh, okay, yeah, maybe a second person would be helpful. I can understand your point of view now. Instead of the sort of, that discontent that arises, it should be other than this. There should be something that is working more in the way that I think it should be. The Buddha, in the sutta, a very famous sutta where there are 3 monks living together, and the Buddha had just come from a situation where there were many monks living together unharmoniously, and then he talks to a group of 3 bhikkhus who are living together harmoniously, and one of them is talking about because the Buddha is inquiring how they do this, and I think the line that's most poignant is, when I see my other brothers doing a task, I ask myself, why is it that I cannot let go of or stop doing what it is that I want to do and help them with what it is that they're doing? And it's interesting, and I think what comes next is, and then I after questioning myself, then I do that. And what's interesting about that is that the monk, he talks about it as if he asks himself this question, so he reflects first. And that's quite beautiful, because it's not missed, that it's just not an automatic behavior. You just go ahead and do it. He might think, well, because I'm putting out the fire right now, and if I don't attend to it in the next, I walk away from it, it's going to set the forest on fire. And so that reflection is a pause that we have to say, okay, what is it that's really important right here? And that question is something that I think comes up and is part of our monastic culture here. It's part of the culture that's brought up in the monastery quite often. You see some of the other monks hanging laundry, or you see some of the any of the residents doing something like that, hanging the laundry, and you say, oh, can I just drop what I'm doing and help those people, or help this other person? And I can't say how uplifting it is as a monk in this monastery to see that happening over and over again. I'll just walk into a room, for example, with a cup in my hand, and it's a very short period of time before one monk just comes up to me and takes the cup out. So, oh, it's an empty cup, but let me take that for you. And often it is the case that I can be fairly busy, and that's really helpful. It's just it's such a felt experience of, oh wow, that gesture amazingly seems to go in such a beautiful direction, an uplifting direction for the mind, that it has a power to it that seems very poignant, very helpful, and much greater than that one would expect, or I would expect from it. And so then gratitude can arise, appreciation can arise. Rather than I'm running around doing these things, and why doesn't somebody help me with my cup, or something like that. I mean, I just when I walked out of the room before the talk, this water wasn't here, and I said to someone, Yasa was opening the door, and I said, oh, could you please, and he said, I'm going to go get you some water. Thanks. And I didn't even say anything about water. And just that quality of looking out, helping, seeing what one can do to be kind and to look after one another, it really dispels that sense of I want to get my joy or my happiness or kind of something's wrong here and it needs to get set right. Just that offering of kindness, of generosity, it pervades the mind, it imbues the mind with so much wholesomeness that then one can have very clear states, very a mind that is lacking of remorse when we think of others, when we do such kind things. And so that sense of pervasive discontentment, that can kind of, it can be quelled quite easily, I find, because of that. And then when we're the receivers of that kindness, then that's the kind of joy that can arise that is so ennobling. It's it just brings one a lot of gratitude. So that was another thing that came up in the tea discussion, was just our sense of what it is that we can have if we express gratitude in our own experience, rather than seeing. It'd be better if there was a guardrail in the shower because water's getting all over the place. That the opposite of that gratitude is, oh, thank goodness there's a shower in here. Thank goodness there's water. It's really nice that bills are paid and that there's even a shower in this office, or there's a bucket that I can use, or there's another kind monk in the room who's on retreat, who I probably shouldn't be bothering right now, or whatever it is. It's just, there's this kind of happiness over what is here, what we are experiencing with the people we live with. One of the nice things that comes out of gratitude and appreciation that dispels so much of this discontent is that when you have that person who in your mind is like the most trouble for you, and if they just went away, then truly the whole world would be happy. But when you can recognize the goodness of that person, when you can recognize that you can appreciate them, you can appreciate even kind gestures they've made towards you, it just brings the mind into such a ebullient state, a state of contentment, appreciation. I think one of the things I learned in Pali around katanyu katawedi is that means gratitude and appreciation, is that the actual Pali definition is that which should be done. I was discussing that with some the monks who had studied Pali, and it's kind of strange because it doesn't actually contain the words appreciation, gratitude. It's that which is done is the literal translation. And of course, words are associated with things like that in our own language. They don't have to have the particular. We can understand them from a context, but that which should be done is important because we can say, well, wow, it really is important to bring these qualities of mind up, to bring qualities of appreciation and gratitude up in our minds, to move ourselves in that wholesome direction, so we're not mired in discontent, in unsatisfactoriness. We're not just stuck on that first noble truth, which is so easy for us to be associated with. I don't think it's a natural inclination of people's minds when they're born, unless they're born from any previous lives, perhaps with very high attainments. But when people aren't, I think it's just the natural inclination to be in this sense realm and see that our gratification only arises on when we have satisfaction through our senses, through just pleasant experience. And it's just so normal for that to be the case that I think most people it just wouldn't be questionable, When I drink this or have this or live this lifestyle, or I have a lot of money, or I have the things that I want, the material possessions, the people who I like, that's of course going to make me happy, and that's all that's important. And we can see this tendency in ourselves, whether I think for myself, just as a practicing Buddhist monk, it's constantly coming up in the mind. That diluted sense that is really the satisfaction that we're seeking, is through our senses. What's going to be pleasant, through what I see, what I hear, what I think. But when we start to observe different qualities of the mind that are not part of that sense realm, wholesome qualities of the mind that incline us away from seeing that it's not all about, or it's not about at all, just gaining pleasant experience, because there will never be enough pleasant experience to be had. Instead, if it's raining gold, still the mind would not be satisfied. And yet we do experience joy, we do experience happiness. But the important thing is not to confuse that happiness with the happiness that is true, that lasts forever, and that's the happiness of Nibbana. So as there are things that bring us a sense of of buoyancy and happiness and joy and rapture. Our minds can become calm and peaceful, and we can really benefit from those qualities of mind occurring. But the problem is our attachment to them, and even in our meditative practice, that attachment needs to be worked with in very important ways, so that we don't get stuck in these ruts that I was mentioning before. So, for example, becoming discontent around not having, experiences in one's meditation that one's had before. You can have dry periods that there's not so much exciting going on in the mind for weeks, months, years. So the question is not, am I getting something out of this that's pleasant, but am I learning? Am I understanding? Am I training my own mind in ways that help me see that there is a way out of this discontent, this unsatisfactoriness? And this is a quality that comes up for many practitioners, that there can be times when meditation is going so nicely, it's so very pleasant, the mind can be with whatever it's paying attention to, and there's just it can be a very pervasive quality of calm and peace, and one can have sometimes many meditations like this, and then the mind just kind of gets quite attached to that. Think, oh, this is how it is. Somehow I've learned how to create the causes and conditions that make this possible, and that might be true. It might be that one has actually learned causes and conditions, but sometimes we're just lucky. We can't necessarily connect the dots. We just have a very pleasant meditation, and we experience the mind that is it's quite pervaded by its own sense of attention and quiet and peace, that it's something that is very different for us in our experience of how we usually relate to our own minds. But when that changes, we say, this isn't right. It shouldn't be this way. Or for example, if you might experience a meditation that was so blissful and peaceful and calm, and then another one where it's just like, it just feels like the mind is so unwieldy and difficult, and you're just really, really working so hard to keep the attention focused, to keep one's mindfulness intact, and dealing with quite difficult experiences, sometimes painful, emotional or physical experiences that are causing the mind to not be able to settle. And yet that's a bad meditation. That's not a meditation that was pleasant or enjoyable. It was awful, some people might say. I thought I couldn't even live through it. I'd have to get up and run out of the room. And yet, which is better, the meditation you fall into that just felt really pleasant and nice, or the one where you were struggling and putting all of your effort into. So sometimes we have to look at the tricks of the mind, the sort of, Mara's delusion, that way that we kind of see things in our very typical vantage for ourselves, where we're not quite aware, oh yeah, this is my own my own sense of how I'm personally seeing the world, seeing why it is or where it is or what's actually happening, and it's not clear. It's not the case, and we take it for granted. And so when we do start to move our minds into how to create contentment, how to recognize discontent, which is often one of the major ways that you can create contentment, is by recognizing your own discontent. Because when you recognize it, then it's seen for what it actually is. When that's there, then it becomes very possible to make the mind quite malleable and wieldy. There's a strength to it when you begin to work with it on that level of seeing, okay, if I just move away from these typical patterns that I have, of seeing people or circumstances or situations in the particular way that I do that create discontentment. If I start to fight against that and to move away from the typical habits I have, then I have a chance to really wake up to the Buddha's teachings, to see what it is that he's encouraging us to investigate. I have a chance to kind of say back to Ajahn, Ajahn, you're right. I don't think, when you take a shower, you splash as much water as I did in the shower, and probably it's okay if there's no guardrail. It's all right. There's not a problem here. The problem is just this mind, the inclinations, and the delusions that occur that lead towards an imbalance of view, seeing things in a way that is creating more dukkha. And though it's a more difficult way than just giving into our typical patterns, it's the way that the Buddha teaches that we can be released from those very patterns, from those very habits. We learn that when we are willing to make mistakes and to really recognize our own foibles, it doesn't have to be such a painful experience. It can be this aha. Here's where I keep getting myself into trouble. And when we recognize that, and then we recognize how to get ourselves out of that trouble, how to get ourselves out of that discontent, then there's a real joy that arises. There's satisfaction in following the Buddha's teaching, satisfaction in the path. I say, okay, now I'm seeing clearly, or more clearly. And I don't always have to go into that reactive state or that movement of mind. And the attention changes. As the Buddha says, whatever one ponders and often thinks about, that will be the inclination of our minds.